joining us. Can you guys hear me? No? Okay, let's see. Okay, is this better? Okay, great. Thank you for joining us today for this discussion on school choice. We're going to have about 35 minutes of discussion with the panelists, and then we're going to turn it over to about 10 minutes of questions from the audience. I'm going to reiterate Evan's request that we're excited that you guys are excited about our programming today. We would ask that you be respectful in your questions and keep them brief so that as many people as possible can question our panelists. So I want to start off with introductions, and then we'll launch right into the questions. To my left, I have State Representative Harold Dutton, who's a Houston Democrat who has been in the House for more than 30 years, and he serves on the House Public Education Committee. Mike Feinberg, who is the co-founder of KIPP, a national network of charter schools, which serves many students, including more than 13,000 in 26 schools in Houston. Reverend Charles Johnson, who's the executive director of Pastors for Texas Children, which is a statewide organization of local pastors and churches advocating for the public education system. And lastly, Randan Steinhauser, policy expert at Texans for Education Opportunity, which is advocating for private school choice in the form of education savings accounts, which would give parents state-subsidized debit cards for private school tuition and for homeschooling. So just to launch into the questions, this week, Representative Dan Huberty made news. You heard from him earlier today on his comments that school choice is essentially dead in the House. And the reaction from school choice advocates was to ask the Republican Party of Texas to censure the representative's comments on school choice. And one organization called for Huberty's resignation as chair of House Public Ed. Does this actually have any effect on whether the leading school choice bill leaves the House committee? Representative Dutton, do you want to talk to this?
Not really. No, I'm kidding. No, I'm kidding. I'm only joking. Well, if I could back up just for a minute.
Sure.
I see the Senate Chair of Education, my good friend Larry Taylor, and I think I saw Paul Colbert, one of my former colleagues there. And so I wanted to thank you for inviting me. When somebody says school choice, I wonder how many people know what they mean. I mean, what does that mean? Does that mean, I think what most people tend to think that it means is that parents or somebody ought to have a choice between a public school and a private school. That's not what I think of as choice. But
that is the bill that's the most contentious right now.
Well, but it's misnamed. It's mislabeled because it's not about choice, it's about preference. Mm-hmm. Because some people would prefer to take their money, public money, and spend it on a private school. And that doesn't seem to be a choice to me. I mean, I think a real choice is when you have a great school around the corner and a great school across town, and children can choose one or the other. But if you're talking about a situation where we're going to take public money and put it in private schools, they already have that choice. I mean, any parent who wants to do that can do that. And so I'm not sure what all this noise is about. I mean, I think Hubert is right that particularly when you count the votes in the House, on the House Public Education Committee, where I've had the pleasure of serving for 28 years now, it's a bill that's not going to get out of the House.
Right.
And I think rightfully so.
Randan, do you want to weigh in on school choice advocates' move to censure that opposition, or ask the Republican Party of Texas to censure that opposition?
Sure, I think that was a small demographic of folks from Huberty's district that were upset with his comments. And I think the real question is, again, what does school choice mean? And for those of us who are advocating in the legislature this session to have a robust school choice program, I want to be the first to tell you that it's not private versus public. It's not homeschools are better than virtual schools or one or the other. We really believe that children learn in a unique way, and whether that's in a traditional classroom setting or in a private school setting, in a virtual school setting, or at a charter school, we really believe that parents know their children better than anyone, and we want parents to have access to options that work for their child.
Great. Does anyone else want to weigh in on on how this affects the bill moving forward?
I'll just say that as ministers, we believe public education is a gift for all children. It's a public trust. It's like water or police protection or parks. It is part of the goodness of creation, if you will, that is accorded to all children. So we love private schools and have a lot of church schools represented in our network. We just don't believe that those schools should be underwritten by public funds because of a variety of reasons. Not only does it diminish the resources for the public interest, but it also entangles the government into those private entities, almost necessarily so. And that, in a nutshell, is what Pastors for Texas Children's all about on the advocacy side, which is about 20% of what we do. 80% is wrapping the resources of a local congregation around that local school. Almost always public, but sometimes private also. Right. Private stays private, public stays public.
So a recent poll that the Texas Tribune did with UT shows that about 44% of about 1,200 Texans surveyed oppose private school choice policies. 35% of those surveyed support it, and then 21% didn't really know how they felt about it. And those percentages change when it comes to the division between urban, rural, and suburban Texans, and Republican and Democrats. It also changes when it comes to, we had a story on homeschooling parents who were opposed to private school choice, and then of course there's a faction of homeschooling parents who support it. So there are a lot of alliances that don't necessarily fall along party lines. How do those splits in opinion affect the ways that you mobilize either for or against private school choice? How do you bring together factions across different groups of people to mobilize in either direction?
Well, I'd be happy to take that question. I've had the opportunity to work across the country in about 30 different states, and this is an issue that really does bring together some strange bedfellows. One of the best opportunities I've had is marching in Montgomery, Alabama with a group of African American pastors, about 3,000 folks coming together. And when you looked at the folks who are advocating and benefiting from school choice traditionally across the country, they are students from low-income households, minorities, single-parent households. And part of the reason that I personally am so passionate about that is because I can identify with those students. And I love the passion of the mother who asked the question. And I think that school choice is not a silver bullet, and I think we need to focus on making sure more resources are going into the classroom, that we ensure that we are talking about unfunded mandates on public schools. But at the same time, we have to talk about empowering parents with access to educational opportunities that work for their child. Even the best school does not work for every child, and so I think we're going to see a lot of opportunities for different organizations and individuals that may not agree on any other issue come together on educational choice, because at the end of the day, it is about the children.
Just add to, all the debates we get into on policy level, in education, it's kindergarten soccer. It's like the scrum is going around the field chasing the soccer ball, right? Thinking like there's one thing, and everything turns into an either or. Is it about protecting traditional public schools or voucher schools? Is it about small schools, technology? Everyone thinks like their one thing is the one thing that's going to fix it. And there is no silver bullet for how we're going to do this. I think it's at the end of the day we can have these, and these debates are interesting. And I'm glad that both Chairman Taylor and Chairman Huber said all these debates are going to happen in their committees. That's great. We have to remember that as important as these are, when you go sit down and talk with the parents in their homes or apartments, which we've done a whole bunch at KIPP. They really don't, at the end of the day, their attitude is call it what you want, right? Call it traditional public school, magnet school, public charter school, voucher school, private school, home school, whatever it is, they want a great school for their kid. That's the label they want, is great school. And so what we have to figure out is how do we set up a system that delivers great school, knowing that any one way we deliver it is not going to work for all our kids.
Well, and I was just going to add, one of the things that always perplexes me is the people who are advocating putting public money in private schools always use poor and black children as their reason for doing so. And what strikes me as strange about that is that even if we did what they were suggesting, you'd still have the majority of black and brown and poor kids in some of these schools that need fixing. And so my question to them is, why haven't they come forward to help us fix these schools? It is true, and I will be the first to admit that if you tell me where a school is located, in what neighborhood it's located in, I can tell you whether or not it's a great school or less than great school. That's unfortunate. But the problem is that we could fix it. And I'll use just one example. Kashmir High School, which is in my district, legislative district, has been low performing for, I think, seven successive school years. One of the things I did is I took a look at why. I asked the school superintendent, not the current one, the last one, why? He said, well, because they didn't do well on the math portion of the standardized test. I said, no, that's not my question. My question is, why didn't they do well on the math portion? What it turns out, he said he didn't know. I said, I do. I went back and looked through TEA, and those students at Kashmir never had a certified math teacher in their whole education career.
Yes.
And so it seems to me that if you really want to help these kids that you're now throwing up as your lead story about school choice, you ought to go in and help us fix the school so that these schools have the same resources that other schools have. Because in HISD, for example, the IB program, some of you here from HISD, the IB program, where is it? It's at Lamar and Bel Air. And yet they have an 800 student waiting list. And why can't you put it at Kashmir, Wheatley, or Yates, or Worthing? And so I hope when this bill fails, that won't be the last we hear from these people. I hope they'll show up and help us fix these inner city schools.
Yeah, as you know, again, I appreciate a lot of that and agree with you in a lot of ways. And I think part of the reason we talk about demographics or statistics is because when we look at the demographics of the students who are on a charter school wait list, of which there are 140,000 students right now who are waiting for a different option, we look at the demographics and the majority of those students are black and brown students from low-income households, and we believe we have an obligation to serve those students. So when we talk about more funding for our low-performing schools, again, looking at where the, quote, failing schools are, they are traditionally in areas that serve those same populations. And so I'd implore all of us to look at where the funding is going in public education because, quite frankly, the superintendent of your area is making over $200,000 a year. So if we want to take some funds and get it to get a good math teacher, let's talk about that.
We have 5.3 million school children in Texas in traditional public schools. That's the charge of the 181 people in the legislature to support. They make an oath before God, a constitutional oath to provide suitable provision for those children in those 8,500 schools. I think Representative Dutton is exactly right. What if we channeled our energy toward those schools? We're diverted by all of these other distractions, session after session after session. I love Senator Taylor. He is best of breed in the Texas Senate. His spirit, his concord, his cooperation, the way he sets the tone high. But that is not always the case, particularly in the Senate. And Texans deserve better. Our children deserve better. And we need to focus the considerable resources of this great state. Governor Perry calls us the Texas miracle. We're looking at the Texas miracle. A little less miraculous on this panel, maybe, but we're looking at wonderful, wonderful, resourceful people who can solve this problem. And let's double down. And let's provide our children the resources that they need so that those children in Kashmir can succeed. Absolutely. Most of our traditional public schools are really doing a great job. We have a couple of hundred maybe that aren't. and they're in neighborhoods often that don't work, sisters and brothers. Those neighborhoods are forgotten by the Texas miracle. And let's develop a policy that will come in and help those neighborhoods.
Well, I think that a lot of, I think probably all of you would agree that the school quality, the discussion on school quality and school choice is tied in some way to school finance, to how schools are being funded across the state. But I think the difference is in how you think that should be solved. How does school choice and how should school choice tie into school finance right now as the Texas legislature decides how to fix the system?
Well, I'm not sure the premise is correct.
Okay.
First of all, I grew up in a segregated school system where when we got books, the first thing we did is looked at the back of it to see whose names were in it, and we were amazed at names that started with Z's and had X's and all that in the back of it. But in my neighborhood, in 5th Ward, on the street next from me, was Ruth Stubblefield Simmons, who was president of Brown University. 2 blocks down the street from me was Marion Ford, who was a Fulbright scholar. And I could go on and on and on, but the point I'm making is that we didn't have a lot of money, but we had a lot of education. And I think the same thing can happen now. When I talk about Kashmir, why does the school district let all of the certified math teachers exist only at certain schools? I mean, why can't somebody say, look, what we need is, if Kashmir has a problem with certified math teachers, okay, certified math teachers at Bel Air or Lamar, or wherever they are, why don't you go, we're gonna send you over to Kashmir and Wheatley and Yates and Worthing, because those are the schools that are traditionally low performing. And so I'm not sure it's a matter of public school finance, although I will tell you this, I do agree that the public school finance as a system is a problem. We just have, most of you recognize where HISD now falls in terms of this recapture issue. One of the reasons HISD is into recapture is because of the number of students that are now going into charter schools. And that has caused the number of students who are now within HISD in terms of its wealth to cause HISD to have to send $165 million to the state. And so I think what we need to do is fix public school finance. But even at that, I think the easier job for us is to fix these inner city schools that are failing.
And what does that mean? What does fixing public school finance look like to you?
Well, it means that that we have to design a system, first of all, that can get 76 votes in the House. More likely than not, that means there are going to be winners and losers. And when you design a bill, clearly what you have to do is come up with a way to get 76 votes, which means you have to have 76 winners so that they don't vote against the bill. But to do it correctly, if we did it correctly, we would ignore the politics of it and do it the way I think it ought to be done, and that is to start over in a system. When the Texas Supreme Court says, well, we think Texas's system might be legal, but it's certainly not a good system. If the Texas Supreme Court can say that, I think the legislature has to stand up and say, we're going to fix this system once and for all. What we have done traditionally, though, is, I think since Paul Colbert was there, we fix it till the next session. Mm. And we fix it to get out of Dodge so that, and that's how recapture even came about. We were fixing the school finance system. But that was supposed to be a temporary fix until we got back after '93 to do something about it. And so, it's not an easy solution, but, I mean, they don't pay us $600 a month to do easy things. Okay.
Representative Dunn points out there is a penalty that HISD is paying through how recapture is formulated right now because of charter enrollment. There's another penalty going on, and I'll just highlight that from charters. Not that, as I said before, charters are not the end-all, be-all, right, but it is an important part of how we have choice and how we're delivering education to a growing number of kids. Charter schools are now, within the public school system, the largest public school system in the state with over 250,000 kids, with 140,000 on the wait list. And unfortunately, the way we set it up is we're telling parents, you now do have more choices within public education via charter schools, but because it's not equal funding, we're going to penalize you, right? So if you choose literally the school across the block within the same taxing authority, right, we're going to take on average $1,000 per year away from each of your children for making that choice. So I think one thing we have to do is kind of figure out within the school finance system if we're going to have choice, which I think we want to have, and how we deliver options differently. Money should follow the child, so we're not penalizing parents for making choices between one school or another.
Right.
We have the 11th largest economy in the world, we're told. And every time I hear an elected official reference that, it climbs up the ladder, 10th or 11th. We've got a lot of money in Texas. We rank about 47th or 48th in the country in per pupil spending, in the 11th largest economy in the world. And we do have the means to solve this problem. We do not yet have the will.
I think when we look across the country at financial spending or per pupil spending, there's really no correlation between the amount of dollars that are spent on a child and the academic outcomes. If that were the case, the $18,000 that's spent per pupil in Newark, New Jersey, they would be the highest performing school district in the country, and they're at the bottom tier. So I think Mike's point about child-centered funding, and I know Representative Dutton has been an advocate for increasing an equitable education system and ensuring that our charters are getting those facility funding. So I think putting the focus on educating the child as opposed to educating the system, and we would see academic outcomes improve.
To that point, Aliyya, if I may, our public school teachers are among the most dedicated professionals I've ever seen in my life. And they love our children with unconditional acceptance. And they receive every single child that shows up at their door. So let's all agree in this room that we are going to lift teachers up to the God-given status that they deserve.
And I would just simply add, we ought to pay them.
Amen.
Yeah, and I think in order for us to be able to pay them, we should really ask where the current funding for education is going, and it's not into the teacher salaries, and it's quite frankly not enough into the classroom.
Well, but I think that, clearly people going to school now have, to use the word here, choices. And so if you graduate in math, for example, you have lots of options other than teaching. And most of those options, just the economics of it would cause you to, unless you happen to be extremely interested, to look at teaching. The money would cause you to look at something else. My attitude is I think we have to do something about that disparity so that that's not a choice. I mean, the choice is not based on economics, so that we can continue to attract the best and brightest to teaching. I mean, I know it's easy to go work at Exxon and be a chemist, but when you think about the salary you get over there versus what you're going to get at a school system, it starts to cause you to think about it. And so I think, what we've got to do in a school finance system is figure out how to make sure that teachers actually get the kind of pay that's, in my opinion, almost twice what we're paying teachers now.
Yes. And where and how we do that, I think if we rely on the state to tell all of us, here's now the new improved salary schedule you should use for your teachers, that's not, top-down doesn't work. We have to free up the schools. One thing, when you have more choice, not only are the kids and families benefiting, the teachers and the principals benefit too, because the skilled ones now go to the highest bidder, and so that's how salaries go up. One thing we've tended to do, which I think is, which we need to get out of the habit of doing this, is when we do put more money into the salaries, we raise rookie teacher salaries. And nothing against rookie teachers. I mean, they need to make good money too, but right now we're paying here in Houston around $50,000 for a rookie teacher, right? When you're 21 years old, $50,000, that's good. That's good. You're living well. You're paying your bills. You have fun, right? The problem is 10 years later, when you now have a family, right, you're making about $54,000, $55,000, right? So that's why we're losing. So we need to basically free up the system to say you don't have to pay your teachers based on this many years of experience, this degree. Freed up. If you're a good teacher, you are now freed up to make $60,000, $70,000, $80,000, $100,000, and that's an element that can come with how we're delivering more choice into the system too.
Right.
I
So
think
we,
it.
sorry, we have to get questions in a little bit, so maybe people can start lining up. But I wanted to turn to talking about students with disabilities in terms of school choice. Would a program like an ESA or a tax credit scholarship help students with disabilities?
Sure, yeah. I think there's a lot of discussion around school choice, serving students with special needs, and this is something that we've seen implemented quite well across the country. We understand that every child learns differently, and specifically those students who have learning disabilities or learning challenges. The traditional classroom model doesn't work for those students all the time. And one thing, if you haven't read the Education Savings Account proposal, one thing that makes that unique when we talk about school choice is that it really is a child-centered focus where the child can use those funds to participate in therapy, tutoring, private accredited schools, or a combination of these things. So for a student with autism or cerebral palsy, their main objective or their main goal may be to just simply improve their speech or their physical capabilities, and that's a true milestone for them, as opposed to being in a traditional classroom setting where they're being compared to students who may not have those disabilities. But let me caveat and say, especially for our friends in the public schools, we understand that the resources are not always there to serve these students, and I believe that through an education savings account, the parents would then have more control to assure that those students are getting the services that they need.
The public school, the traditional public school, is clearly the best place for special needs children. And it doesn't mean that we don't have some challenges and issues that need to be ironed out.
As the Houston Chronicle has pointed out.
It's very true, and let's double down and let's solve that problem. But as we talked about teachers and the primacy of teachers a moment ago, notice how we had an instant agreement. We had an instant consensus. So, therefore, if we have a problem in education, let's go to our teachers first. Let's ask our teachers how to solve that problem. The children the professionals who are with our children all day long, every day, who respond to a call from God to do that vocational charge. But oftentimes our classroom teachers are the last people we go to solve issues about public education. And that's part of the breakdown and the division that we have in this state.
I would just add educators, absolutely, but first and foremost are the parents who know their children better than anyone, and they also have to be a part of this conversation.
I agree with that.
I think that we're out of time, so maybe let's start with the questions. Do you want to start?
Sure. My question is, we talked about students with disabilities. The question is, do these private entities have to follow IDEA, the federal law that requires the public schools to provide the services for special education? And also, do these private schools have to hire the speech therapist to provide those services to students with disabilities? Or is this an additional cost outside of the private school cost that these students will need?
Well, there would be no additional cost to the parents who participated in this program. I will say that we conducted a survey of the 836 private accredited schools in Texas, and we found that there are roughly 130,000 open and available seats in these private schools. That roughly matches our 140,000 students who are on the charter school waitlist. We also surveyed these private schools to ask them, would you be willing to participate in a school choice program? Overwhelmingly, we found that they would be willing to. And most importantly, and when it comes to students with special needs, we asked them, would you be willing to accept students with special needs, and do you currently have the capabilities to serve them? We also found that they're overwhelmingly interested in serving students with special needs and have the capabilities to.
But the question was, are they required to provide the services of IDEA?
Again, I think it goes up to the parents. If the parent decides that that school is capable.
Please answer the question. Guys, please be respectful of our panelists.
All right.
There is no new federal regulations on any private school that would participate in a private school choice program.
Great. Can we go to the next question?
Okay. Hello, I'm one of the parents that you referred to that needs to be involved in this kind of discussion. If we know that every child learns in a different way, then why is Texas allowing entities such as who receive vouchers to capitalize on the shortcomings of our public education system? In other words, why are these vouchers and why are these schools not a temporary thing while we fix our problems in Texas? This should be a temporary thing. As he said, children with special needs, the public education system should be identifying that children learn in different ways. Why are we allowing folks to make money off of the failure of Texas to identify this and implement strategies and policies that reflects the identification and the solution to this problem?
Right, so the question, as I heard it, is how
why are charter schools not a temporary thing? We all know once they start making money, they're going to want to keep it in place.
Everybody, charter schools or vouchers?
Or private schools?
Which one? You want to talk about vouchers or charters? Or
school choice. Why is school choice even a thing? Why is it not temporary? If we fail as Texas to identify this issue, then we have folks that want to make money off the fact that we're not identifying and fixing this issue. Right. Once we get the public school system to an ideal state, a more ideal state, do we really believe that these folks are going to fall back and say, well, we did our job, we're going to go ahead and stop making money off y'all? Right. No, they're not.
Right.
So why isn't it temporary?
First off, we're blending a couple things that question. There's private schools and charter schools are public schools and they're nonprofit, so no one's making money within a nonprofit charter school. But then there's a couple things to keep in mind. There's public education, and then there's how we deliver public education. Public education is a concept that the community pools its resources to educate all of the kids. We should all be protective of that concept institution. We shouldn't let anything happen to it. Then there's how we deliver the public education. And the way we've done it traditionally for the last 100 years in Texas and around the United States is we've created tax zones called school districts. We elect board members to govern the school district. The board members hire superintendents. Superintendent hires principals. Principals run schools. They don't lead schools, they run schools. There's a difference. They should lead schools. And we draw zones around those schools. So if you live in that zone, that's school you go to, right? That's not public education. That's how we've chosen to deliver it. And we shouldn't have so much hubris to believe in the last 100 years we've created God's gift to how you deliver public education. There's no other way to do it. Charter schools are one more way to deliver public education. Charter schools are not God's gift either. But we just have to get out of the definition of insanity of thinking, let's just keep delivering education the exact same way, one way, and expect it to work for all 5.3 million kids in Texas, not thinking that we should start to differentiate how we deliver education to meet the needs of all of our kids. So ultimately, I don't think this is a temporary solution. I don't think it's an either or. I don't think traditional public schools should go away. I don't think magnet schools should go away. I don't think public charter schools should go away. Whether or not we need to add more choice through vouchers is an interesting debate that we need to be having the session. But what are we doing to realize that we've never been at really doing a great job with all of our kids getting to and having great education, having opportunities post-secondary? And the system is working just fine today for about 30% of the kids who are doing just fine going post-secondary. And we shouldn't change it for them. But for the others who are struggling, how do we deliver education in a different way to make their needs too, so we can look back and say, like, we are doing a good job of the system without having to do it just one way?
Couple of things there, Mike. I think those are great points. The charter school, we're asked every day about charter schools. We love great charter schools. Let's make charter schools better. We want charter schools to be under those democratically elected systems of accountability. We don't want the supervisors of the charter school being in New York or California where the constituents can have no contact. That seems to be anti-democratic to us. Let's make charter schools were a great innovation. That's a place where we can explore and improve. Secondly, we now have, after 30 years, the data in on voucher schools. It's not great, y'all. It's not great. And so let's take what is good, what has worked, let's leave and check off the list what doesn't work, and let's focus on the 90% of our children, 85 to 90% of our children in this country that are educated in traditional public schools.
Very quickly, just to address the comment that the students who participate in voucher schools are not performing well, there was a new study out just today that showed students who participate in the Milwaukee voucher program graduate at a higher rate, higher academic outcomes. Across the country, there are 60-plus programs. We see consistently that academic outcomes improve, parental satisfaction increases, graduation rates higher. So we do see that these gold standard studies that have been done across the country show, by and large, that students who are participating in a private school choice program outperform their counterparts.
That's false.
Let's go to the next question.
Yes. Okay, so I had a question for Charles Johnson, with Pastor for Texas Children. So in that name is the word pastor, you know, I think that's obviously important to you. Oh, so that implies Christianity, and you just invoke the oath of God that, you know, our legislators have to put their hand on the Bible. So how is your organization promoting Christianity and Christian educational options for the children of Texas, especially when y'all are founded and funded by the American Federation of Teachers, which puts adults first, children second, and I would say, frankly, religion and Christian education third?
Thank you for the question. First of all, we believe that religious liberty is a gift from God for all people. Thomas Jefferson didn't make it up. James Madison didn't make it up. The heart is the place for faith. The way Madison put it in the First Amendment of the Constitution of the United States is, this government, no government really, this government shall make no establishment of religion, nor prohibit the free exercise thereof. The heart, the home, the church is the place where that religion should be freely exercised. The public institution should not be used. And when that happens, true religion, authentic religion, gets contaminated. Secondly, you mentioned the American Federation of Teachers. We got, basically through our friend Louis Malfaro, a good, dear personal friend, an initial, very small, very modest, very generous at that time, 3 years ago, Louis, grant to put some gasoline in our car. I don't mind telling you, it was $3,000. That's the money we've received from the American Federation of Teachers. I want to say in the same breath that we love teachers, we love teacher associations, and we love teacher unions. Does that mean that we agree with everything teacher unions do? No. I love Senator Taylor, but I don't agree with every position he takes. I love Representative Dutton. I don't agree with every position he takes. I love good public servants, Republican, Democrat, and Independent. And we have some general agreements, and we have some disagreements. We believe that religious liberty is something that is, this country was built upon it. It is a cherished principle, and let's don't go compromising it now through school choice vouchers, much of the money of which will go to support church schools. We oppose that.
Can I just inject something here that's probably not any related to the question, but I think it's related to the issue of how we improve public education. I was just looking around counting, and let me start it this way. Let me ask everybody here to think about which of the racial and gender groups were at the bottom of our education ladder. Who do you think it is?
Black boys.
Black males. And yet, that is, I mean, even when I look around this room, there are only probably less than 10 black males in this room. Now, I raise that because everything we have done in public education since I've been there the 28 years, that cohort is still at the bottom. Whether we're talking about 15 tests, 5 tests, or 1 test, that group still remains at the bottom. And so I hope that this conversation can begin to help us address how do we improve education by raising the floor. We know a lot about how to raise the ceiling, but raising the floor in education has been difficult, and I think to a large extent has been ignored. And so I hope when you all leave here, you'll leave here trying to figure out the answer to that question.
Great. We have time for one more question.
Thank you all so much for being here today. I sincerely believe that every person here wants the best for our students. During President Trump's address to Congress, he asserted, "Education is a civil rights issue of our time." This is most true for students with disabilities. The President and Education Secretary DeVos are advocating for increased school choice, which will further spread funds and needed resources. Private schools are the least inclusive and have no obligation to serve students with intellectual and physical disabilities as protected by IDEA. Earlier today, Chairman Taylor said that in Arizona, with school choice, the public schools were recommending these institutions for children with intellectual disabilities because outcomes have been so good. No research since the 70s have found segregated education to have a better outcome. After decades of fighting against segregation, school choice will further reduce the effective inclusion of students with disabilities in their home schools and communities. Parents should have the option to choose the best school. Private school, home school, virtual school. I think there's really a lot of quality options out there. But federal funds should not support private and non-accredited school. So my question is to each of you, how do you believe what you are supporting will protect the most vulnerable students?
Well, let me just say this to you. As I started out, I think parents already have a choice. I think this is not about choice. This is about, I would label it a preference that some people want. Some people want to take public money and use it for a private school, a private purpose. I don't think that solves the problem that we have in public education on any level, for that matter. I mean, I think that may give some students a way out of certain schools, but at the end of the day, we still have to fix the bad schools. I mean, we've still got to fix them, and if we don't fix them, we will all pay for it. And as I tell some of the parents in Northeast Houston, you can say, well, I'm going to move to the Woodlands, the Sugar Lands, all the other lands. But your children are going to run into those other children that you're running away from. And it seems to me that we have a better approach when we all come together and say, first of all, let's identify the schools that need to be fixed, and let's provide all of the resources they need to fix them.
Amen.
So that nobody has to make a choice, as I said earlier, between a bad school around the corner and a good school across town. That's not a choice. And it's certainly not a choice when you start talking about, well, we're going to give vouchers to somebody. That, to me, it attacks public schools and leaves us with fewer resources to deal with the real issues that are going to be remaining after some students who may benefit from vouchers.
As we go down the row and hear, I guess, from the different perspectives of how we're delivering it, I'll give the charter perspective. As public schools, charter schools are regulated by IDEA at the federal level, at the state level as well. So charter schools are serving special ed kids and are being regulated by state and federal government how we do so.
I'd just say that I think our public school system can improve in meeting the needs of special needs students. I'll just tell our moms that are here today, a lot of what we do is accompany those families to those local neighborhood schools. And we sit down with them. It is a basically, deeply, profoundly spiritual moment. You can only imagine when the pastor is with the parent engagement, with the principal, 100% of whom really care about that child. Now, they aren't always 100% in caring for your children. I know that. But let's pour, as Representative Dutton said, let's give those schools and those children the resources that they need to care for those children.
I'd like to just follow up on a point that Representative Dutton made about young African American males, because I also see that as a vulnerable population that needs to be served. And I do believe that there is some forced segregation right now. You can go to a good school if you live in the right zip code. If your family can afford to live in a wealthy area, and you look at the demographics of those schools, and they're not serving the low-income minority males. And so I think that we need to have a discussion about choice for parents who do not want to go to that government school. And we talk about public funds. Folks, these are your dollars. These are your tax dollars. So ask for accountability from the schools in your area, because these are your funds, these are your kids, and you deserve answers.
And the question I had asked, though, was
I'm sorry,
about...
that's all we have time for right now. You can definitely talk to the panelists after this is over. Please thank our panelists for being here today.